he's known as the king of anti-vax. To say that he's not against vaccines, he's said statements like there's no safe vaccine previously on various podcasts. He's been known to have caused the Samoan epidemic that killed 83 children a few years ago, just before the pandemic. He's also said that AIDS is not caused by a virus. It's caused by poppers and many other nonsense, in addition to nonsense about fluoride. Now, he might be okay on certain things like, ultra processed foods and, contaminants in foods, but a broken clock is right twice a day as well. And RFK Jr. is singularly one of the worst things to ever happen to not just the United States, but to humanity if he was to carry out a lot of what he says.
Well, Donald Trump has appointed the vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his health secretary, and that's raised more than a few eyebrows. The president-elect announced the nomination in a speech at Mar-a-Lago.
And I just looked at the news reports. People like you, Bobby. Don't get too popular, Bobby. Oh. You've reached about the level. Now, we want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you, and boy, does he feel it in his heart.
The maverick son of Bobby Kennedy and nephew of JFK endorsed Donald Trump after ending his independent run for the presidency. But what has the new health secretary really got planned for the American public? Well, let's hear from Doug McKinnon, former White House and Pentagon official and aide to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And in a moment, we'll also speak to Dr Eric Feigl-Ding, who's chair of the NECSI, Department of Public Health. So welcome to you both. Good afternoon, Doug. First to you, I just want your reaction really to some of these cabinet picks, which are causing so much sort of outrage and uproar. I mean, is that part of the plan, do you think?
Well, Kathy, thanks for having me on. Obviously it's causing outrage and uproar on one side of the political equation, not the other. So I think with President Trump, you have to understand, and your audience has to understand, that in his first administration, he was, in fact, betrayed by a number of people from the Republican establishment within his White House, within his administration, and he didn't get nearly as much done as he wanted to. So is he picking loyalists? Ultimately, yes, and there's no surprise in that. Excuse me. But the problem is, too, is that, he's going to have to get these people confirmed, to your point. And I suspect, Pete Hegseth, as the nominee for the Department of Defense. I know Pete. I've had some coffees with him. He's a good guy. I think he is qualified. Matt Gaetz is obviously a surprise announcement for Attorney General. He's going to be a little bit tougher to confirm. With regard to Bobby Kennedy, I suspect he will be confirmed. And it's one of these things where, Kennedy has said from day one, he's not against vaccines. He just wants to have them studied. And, and that same issue, was a little bit of a problem in the United Kingdom as it was in the United States in terms of, the vax for COVID and should people get them, is it my body, my choice? So a lot of those things were going on. And I think, again, the outrage is on one side, but I think ultimately as this plays out, 3 of those 4 for sure are going to be confirmed, and we'll see what happens with Matt Gaetz.
Well, on Matt Gaetz, and I'll come back to RFK in a second. But Matt Gaetz, I mean, he's been under investigation over allegations of underage sex and trafficking. He denies the allegations, but it's pretty jaw-dropping, isn't it?
Well, it's something that you don't want to have out there, but I think let's let the story play out. Let's the evidence come out, and obviously, again, now that these guys have been announced as nominees, you're going to have a massive amount of leaks, from the inside against them. But but one of the things that Trump wanted in Matt Gaetz was President Trump felt the Department of Justice was weaponized against him, not only in his first administration, but for the last 4 years after. And I think there's a good case to be made that that's exactly so. But, then Matt Gaetz would also say that the Biden Department of Justice was weaponized against him. So for President Trump, he wants somebody in there that understands why it was weaponized, how it was weaponized, how we can stop that from happening again. And obviously Matt Gaetz, there's some people that like him. There's a number of people that aren't fond of him. And that's going to be a contentious, confirmation hearing for sure.
And what of RFK Jr.? Because you said, he's not against vaccines as a whole, but he has, spread health-related conspiracy theories, hasn't he, really, about Wi-Fi signals causing leaky brain and chemicals in water turning children transgender. I mean, he's pretty wacky, isn't he?
Well, I don't think so. Again, I think he's raised a lot of legitimate questions over time. And you have to understand too, Kathy, that during this last election, when, Bobby Kennedy suspended his campaign and then endorsed, Donald Trump, that brought hundreds of thousands to millions of votes to then president, to candidate Trump. And one of the main reasons for that is there are so many moms in the United States that are worried about the chemicals that are going into their children's food. And they realize there's really only been one voice in the last number of years that has been railing against that, and that's Kennedy. And so those moms, even though maybe they didn't like Trump so much, they decided to vote for Trump because they wanted Kennedy in the cabinet. And that's a significant, portion of the voter base in the United States. And again, I think as this plays out, I think Kennedy's going to be a real net plus for the president.
I mean, I'm sort of surprised to hear you say that because, he was banned from Instagram during the pandemic for sharing unfounded claims about COVID-19 and he wants to remove fluoride from water. This is sort of way out there, isn't it?
No, I don't think so, because again, you have to remember too, he was banned from, Instagram again, but who's banning him, right? As opposed to, again, there were millions of people in the United Kingdom, that didn't want to get the vaccine. There were hundreds of millions of people, or at least tens of millions of people around the world that did not want to get the vaccine. And I'm all in favor of the vaccine if people want to have it. But if you don't want to have it, again, the left always preaches my body, my choice, except when it came to the vaccine, it's like, do what we say.
Well,
so I think Kennedy was raising some questions.
But cases of infectious preventable diseases like measles and polio could rise. That could have fatal consequences for lots of kids, couldn't it? So it's not just about your own kids and not wanting them vaccinated, but the others. Does that worry you?
No, Kathy, that's a great point. And I agree with you that we have to be very careful about, not throwing out the baby with the bathwater with regard to vaccines and not using sort of, just, over the top rhetoric on some of these things. Each one has to be studied individually and to make sure that there are a number of vaccines that are incredibly important on the planet Earth, and we have to make sure our children get those.
Right.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with studying those to make sure, again, obviously, Operation Warp Speed, which originated under President Trump for the vaccines, came out very, very fast. And the big pharma companies that were putting them out were given immunity, not to be sued if anything went wrong. And there were a number of people, again, in the United Kingdom and the United States that would say they had side effects from those vaccines. And I don't want to get bogged down in that issue per se. Well, but again, I just think ultimately, these nominees are going to be successful for Trump.
Well, Doug, if you wouldn't mind just waiting there for a moment, we'll come back to you on some of the broader points. But I just want to bring in Dr Eric Feigl-Ding here, who's chair of the New England Complex Systems Public Health. He's a public health scientist, New England Complex Systems Institute. Sorry to give it its full title. Welcome to you, Doctor. Just tell me what your concerns are, if you are concerned about what RFK Jr. has said about vaccines.
Well, I think RFK has said more than just concerning things about vaccines, and Trump's other picks have been very worrisome. By the way, he says he doesn't ever wash his hands for the last 10 years, which is very worrisome in itself. And by the way, I think some of the other things that your colleague said about, there's no controversy other than Matt Gaetz, that's not true. Chuck Hagel, former Republican Secretary of Defense, has also come out strongly against Hegseth and many others. And Tulsi Gabbard has security problems. But back on RFK Jr., RFK Jr. in itself, he's one of the most, he's known as the king of anti-vax. To say that he's not against vaccines, he's said statements like there's no safe vaccine previously on various podcasts. He's been known to have caused the Samoan epidemic that killed 83 children a few years ago, just before the pandemic. He's also said that AIDS is not caused by a virus. It's caused by poppers and many other nonsense, in addition to nonsense about fluoride. Now, he might be okay on certain things like, ultra-processed foods and, contaminants in foods, but a broken clock is right twice a day as well. And RFK Jr. is singularly one of the worst things to ever happen to not just the United States, but to humanity if he was to carry out a lot of what he says.
Well, let me just pick you up on that, because that was quite a statement. Last week he said there was no plan to take vaccines away from anybody, but he wanted Americans to make informed choices. I mean, perhaps he's a reformed character and he's jettisoned some of his wilder claims.
Well, yes, he's reformed character after a worm has eaten part of his brain. Sure, he couches. He's very careful on podcasts, right-wing podcasts. He says these ostentatious things in public. He couches them much more. Oh, I'm not against vaccines. You can give vaccines if you want to. But the thing is that children in Western countries, including the United States and in Britain and in Europe and Canada, children need vaccines to go to schools, to go to public schools. And there's a vaccine mandate for, childhood vaccines. What he's inherently saying is he would remove all the mandates for all children going to schools of any vaccine.
So what would be the consequences of that then? Would children die?
The consequences measles is coming back, pertussis is coming back. We don't want polio to come back. These viruses have and pathogens have not been wiped out off the. Smallpox has been wiped out. But these pathogens have not been wiped out. And I just shudder if a bird flu were to hit. And again, it's not just with the vaccines.
Let me just pick you up on that one point, though. Do you think that this appointment and the policies you believe he will introduce will lead to children losing their lives?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because right now he's already sowing so much vaccine disinformation and health disinformation right now. That childhood vaccination rates are already dropping. Parents are already using bogus, exemptions to get their kids not taking the vaccine before attending school. And if he removes that requirement, and as well as funding for childhood vaccination programs, these epidemics will roar back. It will roar back and it will not just stop at the U.S. border gates either.
Right. Let me ask Doug McKinnon, ex-Reagan advisor, to respond to that. Doug, your thoughts on what you've just heard from the doctor there?
Yeah, well, 2 points. One, I think the doctor is probably left of center on a lot of political issues, and that's fine. I strongly support him, for being that way. Yeah, okay, that's great, Sue. But my point too is with regard to Pete Hegseth and what you just said. I've been around Pete Hegseth a number of times, and I watched him wash his hands, so I don't know where that comes from. And then when
he said it on air on Fox News.
Well, okay. Well, I've been around him and watching him wash his hands, so I can tell you he does. And then the other thing is with regard to Chuck Hagel. Well, Chuck Hagel is an announced never Trumper, and so anything that Trump does, he's going to be against. And again, and that's one of the things too, I think, Kathy, that your listeners have to be aware of. And I think one of the reasons that Trump won so convincingly is that so much of the rhetoric from the left has been so over the top and so outrageous to the point where you're not getting to the issues that matter to the voters. What mattered to the voters now was
Pete
bread and butter.
has a white nationalist tattoo. I'm pretty sure you've seen it too, and that's pretty factual as well.
I don't know whether that is factual or not. So let's keep it clean and stick to the facts. But Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, if you could just respond to what you've heard there from Doug about the left is sort of getting things out of proportion and making wild claims.
These are fact-based things about, for example, the Samoan outbreak and RFK Jr.'s clear responsibility in fueling that outbreak and on that island. And Children's Health Defense is inherently well known to be one of the worst anti-vaccine groups out there. And fluoride has been well endorsed by every single American Medical Association, Pediatric Association, Dental Association, World Health Organization, but not RFK Jr.
Right. And well, this debate is going to run and run, but thank you both very much for joining us. Plenty to discuss there in the coming weeks. Doug McKinnon and Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, thank you both very much. Steve Herman is Chief National Correspondent for Voice of America and the author of Behind the White House Curtain and joins us now. Steve, good afternoon.
Good morning from Virginia.
You're in Virginia today. Fantastic. Look, the appointments keep rolling in. And the last time we spoke a couple of days ago, we said that RFK Jr. was the one that needed to be slotted into position. And that has now happened. I wonder about the backlash over there in the States, because despite how squeamish vaccine skepticism might make some people, there is an audience for it over in America. And there are other measures that RFK Jr. is a fan of that actually are quite sensible?
I would say that vaccine skeptics and those who also support RFK Jr.'s other positions, such as taking the fluoride out of the water supply, are a tiny minority. And obviously, the vast majority of scientists do not agree with these positions. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if confirmed or put in that job by a recess appointment, which we can talk about if you want, would oversee the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control, and other parts of the government apparatus that are concerned with keeping medicines and foods safe in this country.
Yeah, I mean, he has no public health experience at all, does he?
Well, he's been an activist and self-studied following his long period of being a fairly mainstream environmental activist. But I think it's about 20 years ago he really started to seemingly become obsessed with this debunked link between certain vaccines and autism. Of course, the rise in the number of cases, diagnosed cases of autism in the United States and other countries is a bit of a mystery, but there's been no conclusive evidence that there's a link to vaccines.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about another one of Donald Trump's appointments. That is Matt Gaetz. He is the nomination for the next US Attorney General. And there is still continued pressure for a House ethics report on Gaetz to be released. So he was investigated, wasn't he, for illicit drug use, misuse of campaign funds, and allegations of sexual misconduct. He's denied all those allegations made against him. But this is not a great look for someone who's going to be in charge of one of the most sort of senior legal positions in the country. Will we ever see that report?
If I were to put a bet on it, I would bet we're going to see that report fairly soon. There are a lot of members in Congress that will have access to this. Not all of them are really Matt Gaetz's friends, even in the Republican Party. Some of the Republican senators who he would appear before for confirmation want to see this report. And so I expect it is going to come out.
So you think it's going to be leaked effectively, Steve?
It's going to be leaked effectively, yes. I do believe that.
And what do you think it's going to say? And what is the potential fallout for it, I suppose? Could it signal the end of Matt Gaetz's nomination?
I hesitate to make any predictions about what could be the possible end for any intended appointee of Donald Trump when both the House and Senate are under the control of the Republican Party. But we do know that a young woman, 20 years old at the time of the interview, who was 17 during the time she alleges that she had sexual relations with Matt Gaetz, and he had been investigated by the U.S. Department of Justice, this federal department that he would be overseeing, had spent a year looking into allegations that this congressman had been involved in sex trafficking. So, I mean, some very sensational, very serious charges here, and it looks, we could be heading for quite a spectacular hearing if he ever does appear before a Senate confirmation committee.
We're hearing reports of Elon Musk trying to smooth things over with Iran. The US has, of course, a spiky relationship, well, particularly Donald Trump had a spiky relationship with Iran. Elon Musk has met with Iran's UN ambassador. Is that a clever move, do you think, or misguided?
I think it's very, very unusual. Now, I don't think there's anything on its face illegal with a private U.S. citizen meeting with the ambassador of any other country accredited to the United Nations. But of course, Iran and the United States do not have diplomatic relations. And Elon Musk is not your average private citizen. He is, at this moment in time, the closest advisor unofficially to the next president of the United States. So this has certainly raised eyebrows along with some of the other moves by President-elect Trump for some of these positions in raising questions from even rock-solid conservatives about questions of loyalty and secrets leaking and all sorts of things. But I think we need to emphasize that as President of the United States, he will have a sweeping immunity from any sort of prosecution, although the people that would be working for him, the acts that they engage in, would not necessarily be protected from criminal prosecution down the road.
Interesting. Okay. It's also important to point out that I don't think the Iranians have directly engaged with the Americans, certainly in direct negotiations since Trump left the nuclear deal quite a few years ago. So, look, an interesting move to get Elon Musk involved. It's not got much to do with government efficiency, but there we go. Let's finish on the process of Donald Trump's nominees getting into position. You've already told us the Senate needs to approve all of these appointments, and we should point out that there are moderate Senate Republicans as well who will be concerned. Just talk us a little way through that. What needs to happen before Elon Musk officially takes his position, for example?
Well, Elon Musk, for example, this Department of Government Efficiency does not exist. So unless it's some sort of outside advisory role and they put the word department on it, it's a fake department, that would have to be set up in the budget approved by Congress, and that's going to take some time if it does happen. However, there is a bit of a trick move that the president can make and has been done by numerous presidents, including Republicans and Democrats, hundreds of times. And that's what's called a recess appointment. If the Senate is not in session, the president can put his nominees into their jobs for up to 2 years by essentially circumventing the Senate. Now, that will not go over very well in the Senate, even with Republican leaders. But it is possible he could do that.
So he can sneak them in, Steve?
Yes, he can.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we will wait and see the fate. There are still plenty more appointments to fill. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Steve Herman there, Chief National Correspondent for Voice of America. Good to see you again, Steve. Thank you.